I think many of you this morning will remember the old Baltimore Catechism. I was asking some of the TV crew around here, do you remember the old Baltimore Catechism? Of course, they're all 20 years younger than I am, and they said no, they don't remember. But there was so much wisdom in the old Baltimore Catechism. And one of the opening statements in the Catechism asked this question: why were you created? Why were you created? Not why were we created. Of course, it's the same in some ways, but why were you created? And the answer given in the Catechism is to love and to serve and to obey God in this life and in the next. Think about that. Why were you created? To love, to serve, and to obey God in this life and in the next. Simple, demanding, and so true. How do you put that in action? How do we put that in action? As I was reflecting on the scripture and on the Baltimore Catechism, that invitation, that directive, I thought of a priest friend of mine who's gone to God now. He was a priest in the Archdiocese of Portland in Oregon. He was a very humble man who lived with the poor, always in a poor parish in that archdiocese. He had a great heart for the poor. He could be a little cranky at times, but that was kind of one of his loving traits. His name was Father Ed. And after Father Ed retired, he didn't want to live at the rectory. He got a little apartment in the poorest part of Portland. And there he lived by himself. And how he continued his ministry was each morning he would get up and he would make a bunch of sandwiches, simple cheese and meat sandwiches, and wrap them up. He'd make a big urn of coffee. He would take the sandwiches and the urn of coffee and he'd put it in a Safeway shopping cart. He'd go to the local park and he would just sit on a bench where the poor would gather. They knew Father Ed, and they knew that they could depend on him for a meal and for a cup of coffee every day. Well, that reputation got spread. And sure enough, reporters and cameramen showed up and they wanted to interview him about what he was doing for the poor. Well, simply giving them something to eat and something to drink, if they wanted. Soon, Father Ed started receiving all these letters from people all over Oregon and beyond. And they told him what a great man he was. And many of them would enclose cash or a check commending him for taking care of the poor. And as I said, Ed could be a little crabby. He was so committed and convicted. And he'd write them back, all of them. He'd put their money in an envelope. He'd put their note in the envelope. He'd put a handwritten note in the envelope and mail it all back to the donor. And that little note that he put in with their letter and with the money that they sent was simply stated, learn to make your own darn sandwiches. You are called to serve. You are called to be a disciple. You are called to use the gifts and talents that God has given to you to share with others. To love, to serve, and to obey God. To be really slaves to God in the best sense of that word, in this life and in the next. To care for our sisters and our brothers in need.